So as I was saying, there was a strong feeling among the founders, the colonists, that they had been denied their rights as Englishmen. And this was given specific demonstration in the phrase, no taxation without representation. Now let's get back to taxation. I have said, and I'm not going to repeat it again, that King George III was involved in a number of war, in a constant series of wars with the French. And that some of those wars took place on the North American continent. We know that as the French and Indian War. The colonists bore the burden of that war. They were taxed. They were taxed where it hurt them most. I personally have never understood what there is about tea that would get anyone terribly excited, and this is after 30 years of living in China and Japan and having spent some time in England. But the tax on tea was the worst possible thing that the king could have done because everybody liked it. It touched everybody, and everybody had to pay. That led to the so-called Boston Tea Party, and which is probably overdone in terms of our history. But the fact of the matter is, the colonists were being taxed to gain the protection of their government, they were told, but they felt they had no say in the affairs of that government. Hence the term taxation without representation. That was a violent issue, it was a highly emotional issue, and it was one that everyone could relate to. So, the founders agreed that they had been denied their rights as Englishmen. And the other side of this was, having been denied their rights as Englishmen, meant that they felt themselves to be they felt themselves to be overburdened by government, which caused the reaction in turn for them to develop this notion of limited government. In other words, there are some things government simply cannot do, because to do that is to contravene the natural rights with which we are all born, which go back to Enlightenment ideals, go back to, in this case, Christian or other religious ideals. I hope I've made that connection for you. A third thing, well, I kind of lost track here, but the next thing that the founders had in common was they were all from the upper strata of society. All were wealthy, all were highly educated, all had long and evolving ties to important families back in England. They were an elite. The so-called American Revolution, by some terms, is not a revolution at all. There are those who would argue incorrectly, I would say, that the American Revolution simply involves the replacement of one elite by another elite that felt its elite privileges have been challenged excessively. Now, I'm not going to go down that road, because it gets us into all kinds of bad stuff, ideology, for instance, that I think is better avoided at this stage. But I do want to make the point that the founders as a group were members of a social and economic elite. Finally, I would say, all the founders were definitely agreed that while the revolution, the war, had been well worth the effort, and anything was better than going back to being a colony of England or any colony of any nation, that the Articles of Confederation simply were not working. You can read and should read the Articles of Confederation because they are in your textbook. That was an example of limited government that was limited in the extreme. It's not too much to say that under the Articles of Confederation, not only did the states have total power, there was simply no source of authority to regulate the interactions between and among the states. As a result, nothing could be done. That's why the Constitutional Convention, when it met, was called for the purpose of considering potential changes and improvements to the Articles of Confederation. And then we are told, the founders said, hey, this is a useless exercise, let's throw it out and start over again. We can do better. Now, I suppose it's necessary, I think it is necessary, to say something at this point about religion. Much is said about whether or not America is a Christian country or is not a Christian country, the state of religion. Clearly, unarguably, at least half the people who came over on the Mayflower and started the Massachusetts Bay Colony came for purposes of finding and creating an environment in which they could practice their religion. That is incontrovertible. It is a matter of fact. Religion is, has been, and I expect always will be important in this country. And I'm not going to address the issue because it takes us too far afield to get into the question of whether or not we are a Christian country. We are a country certainly in which religion is extremely, extremely important. But we have to ask ourselves, what do we mean by religion? And there were many different kinds of religion that existed within the colonies. The Pilgrims were Congregationalists, United Church of Christ, as we know them today, an extremely liberal Christian organization, indeed very different from what they were 300 or 400 years ago. There was the Church of England, Episcopalians. Excuse me. There were also Baptists, people who had turned their backs on not only the Roman Church and the Church of England, but who had their own kind of approach to things, and who did not get on very well with Puritan leaders in the United States. So the founders had to deal with the question of, what do we do about religion? Nobody wanted to give it up. Everybody recognized that it was important. And undoubtedly, a large percentage of our founders were perfectly sincere believers and practitioners in particular creeds. The approach that they took, they had this in common, was to simply say, government will have no involvement at all in religion. The government will not establish a religion. Government will not establish a religion. Government will not make it difficult or impede anyone in his or her effort to practice his or her religion. And that has been an American compromise about religion. Any discussion of the subject, I think, must start with that. We'll get back to this several lectures down the line. What I've tried to do thus far is to talk about what it was. The point of the exercise is how and in what ways is history important to the founding of the American public. I've tried to explain what it is the founders had in common, the ideas that they shared. We also have to realize that they had several things that divided them. Generally speaking, those in the North tended to be Congregationalist in terms of religion, Church of England in terms of religion. They were involved in commerce or in the nascent industry of the day. Their economic requirements, their economic preferences, they wanted cheap food, They wanted low taxes, they wanted a stable currency, and they wanted things to be able to, they wanted a government that would manage its infrastructure.